What is up, everyone? This is Brandon from Wealth Potion, and we are on our way to Bitcoin Seoul Conference 2025. This is the second year of the Bitcoin Seoul Conference. If you want to check out a recap of my attendance of last year's conference in 2024, you can check out the video here. But it's a really exciting conference, in my opinion. For those that don't know, South Korea is a bit more heavy on crypto than it is on Bitcoin. So to have a Bitcoin only conference in Korea is a huge win for the Bitcoin ecosystem. This year we have some amazing speakers, including Stefan Livera, Dennis Porter, Preston Pish. And so I'll be kind of live tweeting and live recording some of the sessions. And I hope you'll join me. So I'll see you in there. All right, everyone. I just got back from the Seoul Bitcoin Conference, and I want to share with you all my key takeaways. And importantly, I want to make sure that this video is valuable to you, whether you are a hardcore Bitcoin maxi like I am, or if you don't really care about Bitcoin really at all, but you are curious enough to hear about what happened at the conference and why I'm so passionate about not just Bitcoin, but Bitcoin in Korea and in Asia. In particular, if you are interested in growing your wealth, I think it's important that you at least understand the thesis for Bitcoin, whether you agree with it or not. You can make up your mind on that, but you should know about it because it is the best performing asset class since its inception about 15 years ago. So without further ado, I'm going to dive into what happened at the Bitcoin conference, and I'm going to start with why. Why is this conference such a big deal to me and to Korea? Then I'm going to dive into some of my more specific takeaways from the conference itself in terms of what were the presentations about? What were some of the big themes at this year's conference? And by far, the two biggest themes I'm seeing are Bitcoin Treasury Companies and physical Bitcoin communities. And I'm going to talk about why these are exciting developments and why there's some risks involved in these developments as well. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about the conference in general and conferences in general, because I'm very passionate about physical events. I think everyone should take time out of their busy schedules to go attend events that they're interested in and not just attend conferences for your work or for your full-time job. And I'll dive into a little bit more about my thinking around that. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right, first and foremost, why is the Bitcoin conference such a big deal here in Korea? And why should you care even if you're not a Bitcoiner? This has a lot to do with, I think, the public perception around Bitcoin. At the end of the day, an event or conference is really about educating people, both people that are really intensely inside the Bitcoin ecosystem and people that are not. And from a lot of people that I speak with, family members, friends, people that I have met randomly, and it happens to come up that I'm interested in Bitcoin, so many people conflate Bitcoin with crypto.
I'm a huge fan of Bitcoin relative to other cryptocurrencies. I've often said there's two kinds of crypto. There's Bitcoin and shitcoin. And it's a long discussion as to why I believe that.
And I did a video on this in the past, but I think it's so important, especially in a country like Korea, where crypto investment dominates the investment landscape here. South Korea is, of course, a unique country for many reasons, but one of the ways that it is unique is its investment landscape. A lot of people here have grown their wealth through real estate. If you look at the South Korean stock market, it's relatively flat. I mean, it's not as sideways as, say, Japan, but it's certainly not up and to the right like the S&P 500 in the United States. And so because of this, there has been a historical gravity towards real estate and a bit of a hesitance towards new technologies like Bitcoin. And I'm not going to get into the full history of Bitcoin and crypto here in Korea, but the SparkNotes summary version is that Bitcoin and crypto came here by storm before it was very regulated. There were a ton of other cryptocurrencies that started to get very popular here. Perhaps the most recent example that many of you will recognize is Terra Luna, where the founder and creator is now in jail and it was a huge story here in Korea. But unfortunately, because of the investment landscape, because of the preferences of Korean investors, crypto has very much become a kind of get-rich-quick scheme here. And Bitcoin was lumped in with the rest of that crypto crowd. What does that result in? Well, there are tons of Web3, DeFi, blockchain events in Korea, but not many Bitcoin-only events in Korea until the Seoul Bitcoin Conference. So as mentioned, this is the second year of the conference. Last year's conference was in May, so just over a year ago, and it is the only Bitcoin-only conference here in South Korea. And I think it's a huge win for the country, but also for the global Bitcoin ecosystem, that a Bitcoin-only event can not only take place, but also thrive in a country that historically has been a lot more interested in the gambling side of crypto. Last year, we had a lot of speakers flying in from all over the world. We saw Safety Namus, the author of the Bitcoin Standard, which is behind me on my desk. We had Stefan Livera, who is a very notable technical podcaster in the space. We had some of the actual Bitcoin core developers, who are people that contribute actively to the Bitcoin core base to this day, who attended the conference last year. We had Jimmy Song, perhaps one of the most popular Korean Bitcoiners in the space. This year, however, we had what I felt like much more local presence, which was huge to see. Last year, of course, speakers flew in from around the world, and this year as well. We had global speakers like Preston Pish, general partner of Ego Death Capital and a very large Bitcoin podcaster. We had Dennis Porter, who has been leading the charge to activate Bitcoin within the US government and drive policy changes within the US. But most interesting to me was that I felt like we had way more Korean Bitcoiners, local Koreans, both entrepreneurs, founders that are creating Bitcoin-only companies, and educators, podcasters, entertainers that are focused on Bitcoin and understand that crypto is not Bitcoin and that Bitcoin is the true innovation. Now, next, let's talk about some of the content of these presentations. And by far the biggest theme that I saw this year is Bitcoin Treasury Companies. Now, this is somewhat of a hotly debated topic because every bull market, in other words, whenever Bitcoin is going up in price, we start to see interesting strategies, let's say, to capitalize on Bitcoin's popularity. Perhaps the most blatant example of this is what many people refer to as the ICO boom of around 2017, which is an ICO is an initial coin offering, and this really started in 2017 when Ethereum started to pick up, which basically spawned hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of other altcoins, which are just imitating Bitcoin or promising some innovation beyond Bitcoin, but the vast majority of these projects die, or some of them are outright scams and their founders are in jail. The ICO boom was perhaps the most blatant grift and attempt to draft off of Bitcoin's popularity, but we've seen more subtle variations of these recently. Some more that come to mind are, for example, Bitcoin lending companies. Now, there are some legitimate Bitcoin lending companies that don't rehypothecate your Bitcoin, but there have been many Bitcoin lending companies where you put up your Bitcoin as collateral and then they give you these amazing interest rates, but then it all collapses when they can't pay all their debt obligations and then the customers lose their Bitcoin. This happened in spades kind of between, let's say, 2021 and 2022. And so that was another form of leverage entering the Bitcoin space to capture the excitement around Bitcoin and at the behest and at the loss of retail investors. There is natural and I think warranted skepticism from many Bitcoiners who have been around for more than a couple years. We see a bunch of Bitcoin Treasury companies that are now adopting the Michael Saylor microstrategy playbook of buying Bitcoin and placing it on the company's balance sheet. But beyond that, we're starting to see some more complex and arcane investment strategies used by these companies. Like what Michael Saylor is doing, they're issuing debt or preferred share offerings or warrants and a whole bunch of technical financial lingo that I'm not going to dive into here, but they are using leverage to acquire more Bitcoin than they have cash in their reserves so that they can put more Bitcoin on their balance sheet with investor funds. And to be clear, I am not a super strong advocate or opponent to this. It's your money. I'm not a financial advisor. If you are willing to take that additional risk by investing in MicroStrategy or Metaplanet or other Bitcoin treasury companies, that is totally your prerogative to seek out higher gains than what Bitcoin can afford you. However, you must be aware that you are taking on risk. Even if you're invested in MicroStrategy, which is the most reputable and experienced public markets investor in the space that's playing this strategy, and in fact has come up with many of these strategies himself, you are trusting Michael Saylor and his finance team to not over leverage and not lose all of the Bitcoin that they hold. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about this, to be honest. I spoke with a lot of the speakers that went on stage to talk about their Bitcoin holding companies. And on one hand, the strategy is sound. MicroStrategy and Metaplanet have done incredibly well and are outperforming Bitcoin by a large margin in many cases. However, investors, especially newer Bitcoin investors, need to understand that they're taking on a risk here. And it is not a guarantee that these companies are going to be able to hold on to all of that Bitcoin if they are using, for example, debt to finance these purchases. And like I said earlier, it does kind of smell like prior bull markets where we had this kind of new trend, this new hype cycle around some innovative way to get better gains than Bitcoin. If we just stick with Bitcoin and we look at its returns, it returns anywhere between 30 to 60% per year. That is phenomenal returns. So look, call me old-fashioned, call me a boomer coiner. I'm going to stick with Bitcoin. I think its returns are phenomenal, and I'd rather not take that additional risk by trusting some company to hold Bitcoin for me. On the other hand, look, Bitcoin is not going to reach global adoption or hyper-Bitcoinization without appealing to different investors that have different backgrounds. And like I mentioned earlier, as I've talked to many local Koreans here, for many Koreans, especially the older generations, it's easier for them to understand a publicly traded company on the stock market that holds Bitcoin than it is for them to understand Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a completely new species of financial asset. And so, hey, if these Bitcoin Treasury companies introduce more people to the Bitcoin ecosystem, then that's a win. I just hope that not too many of them get rug pulled by the companies that do go under. All right, so that was the big theme that I noticed. Another theme, though, that I think is just as exciting is the emergence of physical Bitcoin spaces all over Asia. So we had presence from the Tokyo Bitcoin base. This is a new building that's based in Tokyo that is a place for Bitcoiners to hang out. They're going to host events. They have a co-working space. They also announced at the conference a co-living space. So, Bitcoiners that are traveling could stay there for days, weeks, or even a month at a time. We had presence from Australia that doesn't have a physical space yet, but has regular Bitcoin meetups. And I was talking with the team down in Australia, shout out to JP, around how it is a little bit more difficult in countries like Australia or Korea because real estate is really expensive, and to have a physical space, you need to put up quite a bit of upfront capital. We heard from Piccolo, who is a pseudonymous Bitcoiner down in Thailand. We heard from Key Pleb, another pseudonymous Bitcoiner down in Indonesia. They are building physical Bitcoin spaces, physical meetup areas and events and physical presence for Bitcoiners. And I think this is a huge trend. I hope we see more and more of this. And that brings me to my last topic. Why are physical spaces important? Why are physical events important? This was touched on by one of the speakers at the conference, a phenomenal Bitcoiner that I met and a Bitcoin company founder here in Seoul named Brian. And he talked about how, look, we could have all just met on Google Meet, right? We didn't have to all be in a physical room, but this ability to come together physically, to meet other like-minded people, to get to know people on a person-to-person basis, not just from their tweets on Twitter or their videos on YouTube. There is something really special about that. And I've shared in the past how I worked for 10 years in B2B tech, in tech startups. The first company I ever worked at was an event technology company. Because I was in sales, I literally spoke with event planners and conference planners every single day for close to 4 years. And let me tell you, event planners are some of the busiest people, but they are so immensely positive and optimistic about the world. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that events are just so energizing. Yes, they are not always the most lucrative business model out there. Yes, they're incredibly stressful to organize, whether it's a conference or a small meetup, but the joy and the value that you get, the intangible value that you receive from meeting other people, from growing your network, from meeting new friends and business partners, it is truly priceless. And so that's my last call to action. Whether you're interested in Bitcoin or you're interested in underwater basket weaving or whatever it is, attend an event, attend a conference that is not related to your full-time job or your work, and just go to learn and to meet other people that are interested in the same thing that you are. And I promise you are going to come out of that event thinking, why didn't I do this sooner? I want to go back to this event next year and maybe go to other events. And that's it for today. This was a bit of a longer video, but hopefully that covers a little bit of everything around the Bitcoin conference. One, why it's such an exciting time to be interested in Bitcoin in Korea, a place that has been historically more interested in crypto. Some of the topics that we covered at the Bitcoin conference and things to look out for if you're interested in learning more about Bitcoin. And last but not least, why you should go attend some conferences, because I think you're going to get a ton of value out of them. So let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer in the comments, and I'll see you next time.